everyone, welcome back to the Sustainable Agriculture Workshop hosted by Andrew College. And today we have, Dr. Lisa Baxter, who's an assistant professor and extension forage agronomist at the College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences at UGA. And we're very honored to have her speaking here. So welcome, Dr. Baxter.
Yep, thank you for having me.
All right, cool. So the first question, we normally ask, our interviewees is, give us a little bit of your background and some of your experience.
Yeah, so I grew up in North Carolina in 4-H. I did everything you could possibly do, I think, in 4-H, from livestock to leadership, raising animals. I did it all.
Cool.
Thought that I wanted to be a large animal vet. And that's actually what I went to college for to begin with. So I went to Berea College, which is a small school in Kentucky. And for the first 3 years I was there, I was 100% certain I was going to be a vet. And something started changing about the time I was in physics 2. I wish I could have figured it out in physics 1, but it took me until physics 2 to figure it out. That I didn't want to do that. I was not enjoying it. It was the what I was learning just didn't fit with where I wanted my career to go. And I had the opportunity to attend a forage conference as part of an academic team while I was there, and met several of who are my colleagues today. And they kind of pulled me over to the forage side. So after graduating from Berea, I went to UGA in Athens for my master's in crop and soil science. I knew I wanted to ultimately come back to the Southeast. And so a good, method is then to go do something totally different for your PhD. So you have something to compare and contrast to. If this is ultimately where I wanted my career to be, I needed to get far away from here for my doctorate. So I did a 180 and I went to Texas Tech out in West Texas in the Panhandle, which climatically is as far from South Georgia as you can get. And I love the university. I love the work that I could do on introducing more sustainable forage systems in light of their declining aquifers. And that's work that I could never have done here in Georgia. Ultimately, West Texas is not where I wanted to spend my career. I'm not climatically suited for that area. I like the Southeast. So I had the opportunity to come back here in 2017 after I graduated as a researcher for almost 2 years, and then stepped into my extension role that I'm currently in.
Okay. So it sounds like you're well traveled. So that's good. And I've been to North Carolina and Texas. I don't want to stay in Texas, too hot. Yeah. But that's cool. That's great. And I like the idea of saying you have to move far away to determine what you want to be in for your PhD, because that's what I did. I'm from Trinidad, so I moved all the way to the US to finish a PhD, actually in West Virginia University. So I fully well understand that. So give us a little idea of specifically what do you do at the UGA extension and what services do you guys offer?
Right. So the big goal of UGA extension is to take university research and give it to producers in a meaningful recommendation. And so I think our mission statement, it's something along the lines of translating research into everyday practice or something along those lines. And so what I do is that on the forage side. I do a little bit of everything, and no 2 days are the same. I've jokingly said I just need to start taking all my pictures with cell phone in hand, because every part of my job, I have cell phone in hand because I'm on it all the time. Most of that is like the number one job that I have is working with county extension agents. We have 159 counties in Georgia, so there's always a question coming somewhere on something all the time. So my number one job is to answer their questions and then also provide the trainings and the content that they need. So I spent last week in Northwest Georgia teaching things like sprayer calibration, hay equipment setup, reading forage tests, things like that. So then they can take that knowledge and train their local producers. Is the most effective use I feel of my time is to use that train the trainer method. I create a lot of content for them, so presentations, handouts, things like that, so that then they can take that tool and use it in their counties. So if everybody has to rely on me for that information, they're going to be waiting a long time for me to come to
Right,
the program
right.
here in the state. But if I can train 159 people, they're going to have a much bigger impact than I could have on my own. The other part of my extension outreach, I do a lot with social media, and developing, our traditional extension tools like popular press articles and things like that. All of this kind of builds off of my research program. So I focus on what we would call contemporary issues, so emerging issues in either just forage production or a lot of hay production, and how we can integrate our novel pest management strategies and precision ag to address those issues. And so all my research kind of comes back to that core mission of we have to focus on the foundation and be more sustainable in how we're applying these techniques. They have to be producer friendly. To do that, I have a lot of collaborations with other researchers, our plant breeders, our county agents, and even industry partners.
Okay, sounds like you got an entire plate full, which is always a good thing. Because I remember the presentation you gave last fall was basically on weed control and stuff like that, which is pretty interesting because to me, I never thought about weeds in the production systems we're in. When I used to work in like West Virginia, it's sometimes it's so cold the weeds don't really grow as fast, right? So one of my questions would be asking some of the weeds. Weeds are a major problem, especially in the South, for sustainable agriculture. So what are some of the major troublesome, quote unquote, weeds that are actually found in Georgia?
Right. It depends a lot on who you ask. If you ask a hay producer, they're going to tell you that crabgrass is just the worst thing ever.
Yeah.
It affects our drying time in the hay production system. So it's very problematic. If you asked a cattleman that same question, they don't have a problem with crabgrass, because at the end of the day, the cows eat it and it provides good nutrition. But overall, if you look at all the forage production systems we have in the state, we have a lot of perennial grass weeds that are nearly impossible to control because we don't have good herbicide options for them. So that's smut grass and vasi grass that's down here more in the southern region. Johnson grass would be more in the northern region. We're seeing more and more perennial foxtail across the state, and we just don't have great recommendations for any of them. The products that we recommend are expensive and they have to be very accurately timed or they don't work at all.
Right.
We have a fair number of broadleaf weeds. At the end of the day, those are pretty easy to control. Okay. And we can work around those, but those perennial grass weeds, especially in our perennial grass forage systems, can be a challenge.
Okay, so I'm thinking like, as you mentioned, the use of herbicides, right? So sometimes the herbicides have to be like directed towards a specific weed, right? And the timing is very important. That's something I get a lot of producers or farmers don't quite understand. I met some farmers where they believe that the more herbicide is sprayed, the faster the weed will die, or you'll kill everything. Sometimes you kill everything, including your crop. And I also remember last time in your talk, you said that sometimes the herbicides get well, not the herbicides, the weed actually becomes, I would say, neutral towards the herbicide. So more companies have to be generating more and more and more chemicals, right? And those chemicals is something we don't really like in sustainable in agriculture. We try to stem away from the chemicals. So what are some of the methods that you could suggest, to our viewers that are looking in who are actually planting? Some of the ways you could actually control these weeds without using the herbicides.
Right. So, I never give an herbicide recommendation without a management plan, which I'm sure is very frustrating to a lot of people trying to get a really short answer from me. I get a lot of questions. Somebody will send me a picture of a weed and they say, "What is this? How do I kill it?" And all they want is a one-line answer. And it's never that simple. Anything we can do to promote ground cover helps prevent weeds. If they never have the sunlight and the bare ground to come up, we're miles ahead of where any herbicide is going to get us. So that comes from good grazing management, rotational grazing, and not allowing the pastures to rest, keeping a good stubble height there of residual forage, having a balanced fertility plan, keeping our soil pH near neutral. All those things that we just think about as good forage management are actually good weed control tools. And there are some of these that, we can be the best manager ever, but if we're coming into a farm where these weeds are already persisting, that's where the herbicide comes in. But there are strategic ways that we can use that herbicide so that it's not something that we're going to have to continually rely on. We're not just slapping a Band-Aid on a problem. We're using this herbicide, once or twice to remedy this issue, and then we're going to let our good forage management take over. And so, for instance, one like smut grass, we're going to spray kind of midsummer near a rain. And so we got to be within 7 days of a rain for that herbicide to work. So we're gonna follow all those label directions on that, so that we are as effective with that single application as we can be. Then we're going to go back and follow it with fertilizer, so our good grass fills back in. As you were talking about, because I believe the program I did, we likely talked about herbicide resistant ryegrass.
Right. Yeah.
We see it with herbicide resistant pigweed. It's becoming more and more prevalent. And what's happened is, we don't have a lot of different active ingredients in forages, and so we've relied on the same chemistry over and over and over again. And so it takes a little extra effort on the producer's side, but if we've sprayed something and the plant doesn't respond, the answer is not to spray again. It's not to spray more. We've got to change up the plan. And so with a lot of these products, they've been sprayed again and again and again at a higher and higher rate, and that was not the answer. So rye grasses and pigweed are both ones that we see that more, just because they've been around for so long.
Yeah, because I feel like a lot of producers tend to go to spraying after one spraying all the time, because I guess judging from back in the days, like the 60s, 70s, and 80s, that's what they used to do and they used to work, but technology has changed and stuff like that. But I feel some of the producers don't really grasp the concept of, if it's not working, you need to actually change the plan. Now, you mentioned something that I think is very important in terms of, you mentioned the soil, right? So if let's switch gears a little bit. Let's go into like pasture lands, right? How could soil fertility management enable the proper establishment of a pasture land? Because I think that's very important as well.
Right. So, and that's a hot topic this year with increasing fertilizer costs. But at the end of the day, if we don't have a balanced soil in terms of nutrition and a good soil pH, we're not going to have a good grassland. And so there are ways that we can be more strategic in how we put out that fertilizer to make it work better for us. Whenever we're going in and establishing, we've got to have those nutrients right the first time. That's our only chance to really incorporate a lot of nutrients in lime. And so we want to take advantage of that opportunity, because once we establish a perennial grass, now we have to surface supply everything, which isn't such a bad thing, but it doesn't act as quickly, especially on the lime side. And so we want to get ahead of any imbalances by soil testing regularly. We recommend testing pastures every 3 years, and then our hay fields every year. And that's just because with a pasture, we should have recycling of nutrients from the grazing animal, whereas with the hay field, we're cutting that crop with those nutrients in it that we applied, and we're taking it somewhere else. So we can get into a deficiency a lot quicker with a hay field than a pasture.
Okay. So let's look at let's take a look at livestock animals, right? So a lot of livestock animals love to eat the grass, right? Especially they love to eat it so close to the ground. What would you tell a producer? What to plant that the livestock would not necessarily eat into the ground? Because I know when livestock eat the soil, some of them eat the soil, it kind of affects them negatively.
Mm-hmm. So an animal can overgraze any plant. So it's not necessarily what they should plant, but it's how they need to manage that. It's not the grass's fault. It's usually our fault as a manager. And so what we really recommend is rotational grazing. And that allows us to control how low the animal can graze rather than letting the animal control it. Because if we let the animals control it, they're going to continually eat that young growth because it's the most nutritious, which means they start overgrazing out those smaller spots and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And so if we can set up a good rotational management plan on our farm, we can prevent that overgrazing just because we're managing our grazing animals and our stocking rate better. A lot of that will come down to a producer needs to then adjust their stocking rate. Overall, most of the farm visits that I go on, the recommendation is you need to buy more land or you need to start selling animals because they have too many animals for that unit land area. And it's unless you're bringing a lot of supplemental feed in, which is not an economical option for most growers, it's not a sustainable option long term. And so you're going to, end up sending the whole farm into decline with overgrazing all of the fields if we don't reduce that stocking rate or find more land, which is something that nobody wants to hear. But that's usually the reality of it. When we are seeing animals graze that low to the ground, they're needing more forage. And the only way to get that is more land or fewer animals.
So my question to you, I mean, I'm just curious, right? Which direction the farmer actually goes to? Does he get rid of the animals or does he buy more land? Which direction they essentially go?
Yeah, nobody ever calls me and tells me what they actually do. So I don't have any data on that. I would imagine at the end of the day, they're selling animals. They're likely going to try to find an additional source of feed. And when that falls through, then start destocking the herd. And that's going to become, I'm afraid, more and more prevalent this year because we didn't have a good hay season last year. We're pretty dry here in South Georgia right now, so the grass isn't growing a lot. If it continues to stay dry and our fertilizer prices stay up, we're not going to produce as much forage, which means the hay and baleage supplementation is going to be even more limiting this fall and winter. And so it's when there is no more extra feed, we have to start looking at selling the animals. So I've done a lot of programs this spring, and it's a harsh reality, but I'm telling the growers, if you're sitting here today and you don't know how you're going to feed your animals every day for the next 6 months, you have too many animals. And we need to evaluate that stocking rate now while your pastures are still in good shape, rather than 6 months from now when you've overgrazed the entire farm, you have no hay in the hay barn, and you have cows losing condition. So it's something that we never want to think about, but it's becoming a reality, especially with our input prices and the climate, what it wants to seem to be this year.
Yeah, that's a reality we have to face most definitely, because if I'm thinking if the cows lose weight or they lose the condition, you won't get premium price for that animal anyway. So you're still losing money on both sides, so that's something I think producers need to take into consideration for this year. If you have to name one management practice, right, for sustainability, your favorite one or the number one practice used in this state, what practice is that? Could you explain a little bit what practice it is, and could you explain a little bit?
So especially linked to pasture sustainability, we have got to let those fields rest. And that's one of the hardest things to explain to a producer, because it's not something that if you do today, you see a benefit tomorrow. So if we think about something like nitrogen fertilization, you put it out, it rains, the grass is greener. You can say, okay, I see what's happening here. With letting the field rest, that's more of a slow improvement. So it's something you're going to see by the end of the season, but it's not something you're going to see next week. And so what we often run into is we're returning back to the same field too often. And so the grass is never getting a chance to really replenish those root carbohydrates. And so it slowly starts kind of pulling in on itself, because we're going to start losing the bigger plants. We're not going to have as healthy of a stand with that deep root system, because it hasn't had a chance to photosynthesize enough to replenish those roots for the next regrowth. So it's something that can steadily cause a field to decline. What we see more often is more of a continuous grazing operation, where all the cows are in one big field, or every gate is open on the farm. And so the cows get to pick and choose where they go, and they're never going to be as efficient in how they pick and choose as if we pick and choose for them. So if any way that we can divide a field, even if we just divide it in two, that we'll start seeing a benefit there. There are several articles out there called The Benefit of a Single Wire, of just dividing one field in two. Most of us have multiple fields, and so it's just closing those gates. I'm often, the rebuttal to that is, well, I can't close the gates because the cows will jump.
Right.
That's probably the first half we need to call. If we can't fence them in, and it seems so common sense, but if we can't fence them in and manage the grazing for them, then we're going to end up right back where we are in the same situation. It doesn't matter what herbicide you put out, what fertilizer you put out. If we can't manage that grazing and allow those fields to rest for at least a month in between grazing events, we're going to start seeing the same situation appear over and over and over again, with the overgrazing and the eventual pasture decline.
Yeah, that's very true, and that's something important. That I have fault sometimes to leave my my gates open, so I know exactly what you're talking about. But I know recently, like I have a colleague who he has a massive farm, right, and he actually he separates his pastures into four blocks, and he rotates within those four blocks. So that's something I think that producers could do as well. Instead of using one whole pasture, 'cause he has a lot of land. He has like 100+ acres, but he just like takes like, I guess, 10 acres and divide into four and keep transferring the cattle from one pasture to the next. So that's another strategy. I see him did it, and I was like, wow, so I probably need to look into that. But that's very true.
Yeah, it can be as complicated or as simple as you want to make it. And so even if you just had two fields, so that you graze one side the first 2 weeks of the month and the other side the next 2 weeks of the month, you're going to see a benefit over what we currently have with continuous grazing.
Yeah, that's important. So my next question, and I always ask our female speakers this question. As an extension agent, as a female extension agent, right? What are the most effective approaches for retaining women in research on the extension system and ensuring that they get involved in design of research and most of the extension procedures to meet both gender specific and wider needs?
Yeah, so in terms of retaining a female specialist, I don't know that it's really any different than retaining a male specialist. So a lot of it comes back to us on the hiring side, making sure we're picking the best person for the job, and whether it's male or female, it just depends on the particular candidates. I think in terms of seeing a female be successful in this field, they really have to have the right attitude, which can sometimes be perceived the wrong way. I understand. But if you come in with that kind of take charge attitude, understanding that you have the doctorate, you are smart, you know the content, and you deserve to be here, I think that's half the battle right there. I think it really helped having a mission statement for my program. So not just following the UGA extension mission statement, but saying every part of my research and extension program will meet this goal. It helps me stay focused and not chase any rabbits. So I'm not just running to every program out there and running every research program I possibly can. It's got to fit into my main goal. Part of that is, and this would go for any new faculty member, is identifying your collaborators early and building a diverse team, whether that's culturally diverse, academically diverse. That's up to you. But I really like having a team of researchers that I work with continuously, one, just to serve as a sounding board. We throw out a lot of ideas in research that are terrible ideas, but we have to talk through those terrible ones to get to that end goal, and to have people that are open and honest and you can have a frank conversation with goes a long way. Those are also your biggest cheerleaders, and that goes for any new faculty member. You've got to have people in your corner. I tell people, being a new professor, it's hard. That's part of what I do is on the social media side with my Lego minifigure. So that's why you can see all the Legos in the background behind me. Like that makes the day a little brighter. And the team that I built around me was very supportive of that. And that has been a cornerstone of my extension program. So if I would have listened to a lot of faculty, of the older faculty when I started, saying, that's not worth your time, you need to be in the truck driving all the time instead, I wouldn't have developed this amazing program that I'm nationally recognized for. And I think a lot of that went back to I followed my mission. I had those people in my corner, and I know that I'm well supported because of it.
Exactly. Sometimes in my opinion, I'm a relatively new faculty member myself. So sometimes you just have to go with what you want to do, your passion, your views. Some people might like it, but you got to do what you got to do. And your program, I must say your program is very, very well thought out, because I did look at your program, you're an example to, especially the female faculty members out there. So I want to thank you for that.
That's one of the best piece of advice that I was given when I started. It was just do your job. Yeah. And I didn't really understand it at the time. I was like, well, that's what we're doing every day. We all come to work and do our job. But if you know what your endpoint is or what your overall mission is, and you know that, all right, my key metrics are I must address extension agent concerns, I must get grant dollars, and I must publish research, everything else just seems to fall into place. And so I've had a lot of opportunities come up, especially with industry collaborators, just because I did my job. So I started establishing research. I promoted that research. I presented that research at national meetings and at producer field days. Those are all kind of key metrics that we would be doing anyway, or we should be doing anyway. And because of that, I have been sought out for certain industry partnerships that have further expanded my research or my extension program. So I think it takes time, and you don't really see it happening within a day or a month or
right.
But looking back, understanding these are the key things I need to do, and everything just starts falling into place. I think if I would have came right out of the gate and said, all right, I want to work with X company on social media production, I want this company to give me herbicide for a demo, like I don't think I would be where I am now. Right. Where it was kind of, just keep your nose to the ground, work on and establish that base, and then everything else that we perceive as just to be so easy for professors that have been in their role forever, those things just naturally start happening.
Yeah, lay the foundation. Yes, exactly. The last question I have for you, since you both deal with students, what advice, right, would you give a student who wants to enter into like a sustainable ag program, or extension program, or even a forage agronomist program?
So on the sustainable ag side, I think they need to keep their minds open. There's often a perception of what sustainable ag is, and that does not encompass everything that we do in sustainable agriculture. And if you every program I've been in has been a sustainable ag system, but that varied from entirely grass-fed animals at Berea College. We were, animal welfare approved, grazing land, like we had all these certifications. So that was one aspect. And then I came to Georgia and we focused on being more targeted with our inputs in terms of pest management. It's also a sustainable ag aspect. And then I went to West Texas, where everything is in a water deficit, and we're trying to improve upon production and give alternatives to traditional row crop systems. very different from where I started at Berea, but also a sustainable ag system. So I wouldn't get kind of pigeonholed into, what your definition of it is, but stay open-minded to what opportunities are out there, and start as general as possible, especially if you're stepping into a college role. I think if I could have just taken general classes my first semester or year, I would have arrived at this career option a lot earlier than I did. But there was that pressure, and it happens everywhere. It wasn't just the college I went to, it happens everywhere. Of, as soon as you graduate high school, it's, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? What are you going to school for? And I think if I would have had time to make some connections, meet with people, and just learn what agriculture truly is, I would have went a different career path, or at least, or different major than what I started my first day of college with. Some of that, it's not necessarily in the classroom, it's getting out and talking to different people, and just asking, hey, what do you do? So for instance, usually when you get a PhD, you have two options. You go to academia or industry.
Right.
And I knew from talking to people on both sides, I am not industry minded. Just the lifestyle that goes with that, and the development of the products that I would have, that was not for me. I wanted the big picture, more holistic approach that comes with academia. I would not have known that just reading something on paper. There had to be a lot of conversations to get there. Right. I'd encourage students, and I've asked every one of them in my lab this semester, because they're all graduating. Every student I have, student worker and graduate student, are graduating right now, and they're all up in the air about what they want to do. And I'm like, I don't think anybody ever asked. I know everybody ever asked me, what do I actually want to do on a daily basis, and what do I enjoy doing? Because I think if somebody would have asked me that, I would have ended up in a research role a lot faster than I did as a pre-vet potential. Just because if you ask what task I like to do, those are research tasks. They're not pre-vet tasks. They're not things that a vet would ultimately do. And nobody ever asked me that question. It was, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. On the extension side, we have a lot of opportunities for internships in the county extension offices over the summer. We also have the Young Scholar program that happens on each campus for high school students in the summer. So you come onto campus. Did you say that again?
You're fine. You're fine.
Wondering where that came from. But we have the Young Scholar program on each campus. So for instance, I have a high school senior coming to work with me in June and July, and he will shadow my entire program. To learn more about just research at the University of Georgia, but also what it means to be an extension specialist. And so there's a lot of opportunities out there like that I would encourage students to seek out, where they're becoming more and more prevalent. I think they just have to ask the right people.
Yeah, that's very true. So I hope the students who are listening to this interview, take your advice, because I was in a similar boat too as well. I couldn't do industry. I needed to always be outdoors. That's just me, and that's something you have to learn really quickly. What are your characteristics, and what you're comfortable and what you enjoy doing? So I really appreciate that advice.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is, and when you're interviewing to go to school or for a scholarship or job or whatever, you're trying to get the answer that you think somebody wants to hear or that sounds good on paper. Mm-hmm. But there's really no wrong answer. So, I mean, if you look at agriculture, there's something for, do you want to be outside all day? Do you want to be in a garden or a row crop field or a pasture? Do you want to sit at a desk all day or be in a lab all day? There is a job for every one of those people. But I've told all my students, I need you to tell me, what do you want to do, so we can be accommodating of that and make and connect you with the right people. So, if I have a student that does not like being inside, hates lab work, he will work outside sun up to sundown, cannot stand being within the four walls of the lab. We're not going to push him towards, a lab opening or focus on him interviewing with any lab program. We're going to do more on-farm meeting with industry reps, things like that. Vice versa, I have another student that loves being inside, does not like going outside and sweating. We're not going to put her in the field or encourage her to be an extension agent or anything like that. She is very well suited and now trained for a lab role. So there's no right or wrong answer, but I think it can be right or wrong to you personally. And we've got to make sure, like, you're not going to be happy long-term in your role if you're not doing something you enjoy.
Exactly. Always do what you enjoy. Well, thank you very much for spending, this time with us this morning, Dr. Baxter. Really appreciate it. And there's so much golden nuggets in this interview here that you could take away. So I hope, our viewers listen, and especially the student part of it. I hope the future agriculture students also listen as well. So thank you very much for being here with us today.
Yep. Thank you for having me.
No problem.